In the 1960s, when New York was fighting to hold itself together through rising costs, shrinking budgets, and neighborhoods that ran on working-class routines, most people never thought twice about where their food came from. The supermarkets looked clean. The delivery trucks showed up on time. The butcher cases sparkled under bright lights. Nobody imagined that behind all of that, in the warehouses, loading docks, and back rooms that fed half the city, there was a different system running. Not loud, not violent, just steady. A system built on shortcuts, favors, and old connections that went back to men who understood that food moved the same way money did. Quietly, daily, predictably. The truth was simple. The city ate fast and it ate cheap. And any business that moved volume moved daily. And moved in trucks eventually caught the attention of men who knew how to turn routine into profit. They did not need guns. They did not need threats. They just needed the right warehouse foreman, the right distributor, and the right man watching expiration dates like they were suggestions instead of rules. If you love stories about power, control, corruption, and quiet empires built in plain sight, make sure to follow, because this one ends where nobody expected it to. New York City, 1961. The city was changing fast. Supermarkets were replacing family shops. Frozen food aisles were growing. Prepared meals were becoming the norm. Everything depended on delivery schedules that ran through the early morning hours, long before most people were awake. The loading docks along the West Side, the warehouse rows in Brooklyn, the meat and produce markets in the Bronx all moved like a second city underneath the real one. And wherever a second city existed, someone eventually tried to own a piece of it. The earliest part of this story came through the Genovese family, who already controlled parts of the Fulton Fish Market and longshore work. They understood one thing better than anyone else in the life. If you control distribution, you control the product. And if you control the product, you control the money. It did not matter if it was fish, beef, produce, or packaged goods. The trucks were the arteries. Whoever owned them owned the flow. Among the men who understood this world best was a figure the older workers still mention with a quiet certainty. His name was Vince Romano, a Genovese associate with a work background that made him fit the business better than anyone else. Before he ever touched a bookkeeper's pencil or a mob envelope, he swept floors in a cold storage warehouse on the West Side. He unloaded trucks at 3 a.m. He packed crates. He watched managers push products past expiration dates because a store needed the delivery and the driver needed the overtime. Nothing dramatic, just the way things worked back then. Vince did not talk much, but he saw everything. He learned how frozen shipments were marked. He learned which managers cut corners. He saw which drivers checked dates and which ones looked the other way. He understood the rhythms of warehouses the way other men understood the streets. And for a man like him, those rhythms were all he needed. By the early 60s, he had moved up to dispatcher. It was a job most people ignored. But in the food business, a dispatcher held real power. He decided which stores got fresh meat and which ones got the older shipments. He decided what moved first and what sat in the freezer another day. People think the mafia stole trucks or hijacked shipments. But the smarter money never touched a truck at all. The smarter money controlled dispatch. That was the opening. What the Genovese saw in Vince was not ambition, it was steadiness. He understood how to turn a warehouse into a quiet earner, and the key was simple. Food that passed its sell-by date was supposed to be discarded. But in a city where stores were desperate to keep shelves filled, expired goods were not trash. They were inventory. They were product, and product meant money. The trick was to make the old product look usable, and to do it without raising alarms. This part comes from old testimony. Not the kind shouted in courtrooms, but the kind that came from retired inspectors, former drivers, and warehouse clerks who remembered what the world looked like before regulations tightened. They all said the same thing. The racket began with substitution. If a store ordered 15 cases of fresh eggs, Vince sent 10 fresh and 5 older. If a diner ordered frozen beef, the older boxes got mixed with the newer ones. The customers never knew. The managers rarely checked. The money flowed in quiet, predictable currents. The Genovese family did not create the system. They just made it organized. By 1963, Vince had moved from dispatcher to quiet operator. He coordinated with warehouse supervisors in Brooklyn and Queens. Men who understood that an extra few $100s a week went further than any company loyalty. He paid drivers small bonuses to make late deliveries without asking questions. He paid clerks to reprint inventory lists. Nothing that left a big mark. Nothing that looked like a crime on paper. Most of the money came from volume, not big scores, not stolen shipments, just the slow, steady movement of outdated goods resold at full price. Supermarkets bought them, diners bought them, school districts bought them. Low-income neighborhoods bought the most because older product was sold to them first. Vince was not a flashy man. He never wore big suits or drove big cars. He lived in a modest house in Queens and kept his voice low. To the older workers who saw him on the docks or in the warehouses, he looked like a man who just understood the job better than the next guy. They did not know that behind him, envelopes were moving upward every week. 5% here, 10% there. A quiet tribute to the family. By the next year, the system had grown. Produce was added. Dairy, frozen chicken, then canned goods. Everything with a date became an opportunity. And since nobody saw the dates once they hit the shelves, the rackets stayed invisible. The city had no idea half its food chain was running on shortcuts. But the men in the business knew. And they knew Vince was the one who made it work without noise. He kept the line steady, he kept the workers paid, and he kept the shelves full. That was the truth of it. By the mid-1960s, the operation reached its strongest point. Not loud, not risky, just steady. The kind of system older men still talk about when they describe how the city once ran underneath the part everyone else saw. Vince Romano had become the quiet center of it, not a boss. Not even a big name in the life, but the man who understood how food moved, how stores panicked when shelves looked thin, and how drivers talked when they thought nobody important was listening. He was the right man in the right place, and the one thing the families cared about was steadiness. The peak came when the supermarkets expanded. National chains opened more locations across the boroughs, and independent stores fought to stay alive. Every one of them depended on deliveries that arrived before dawn. Every one of them relied on invoices nobody double-checked. That was the beauty of the system. The paper matched the product only if someone wanted it to. Most did not. They just wanted the truck to arrive, the shelves to stay full, and the customers to stop complaining. The Genovese family tied the system into 3 distribution warehouses, one in Hunts Point, one in Greenpoint, one near Mosbath. Vince kept the 3 moving with the precision of a man who had grown up inside cold storage. He knew how long boxes could sit before they went bad. He knew which inspectors checked dates and which ones never bothered. He knew that most clerks in supermarkets were too young, too tired, or too rushed to notice that the cans or cartons coming off the truck were older than they should have been. Most folks think the families wanted control for power, but the older workers say something different. They wanted order. They hated unpredictability. A business that ran on a schedule was perfect. Food moved every day. Trucks left every morning. Its product went out the door, whether it was new or old. Predictable. The envelopes came in every Friday, and nothing disrupted the line unless someone wanted attention. And nobody wanted attention. The money was not flashy, but it was constant. A few $100s from one warehouse to a few thousand a week from another. Stores in poorer neighborhoods were the easiest to work with. They struggled to stay profitable. They looked the other way when the frozen chicken came in a little older, or when the dairy had less time left. Some owners even preferred it because Vince gave them better pricing. They bought low, they sold normal. The customers rarely noticed. They were too busy trying to stretch a dollar. There are men who still say the peak year was 1967. That was when the system touched half the city's supermarkets in one way or another. Not full control, not ownership, quiet reach. Vince handled eggs, dairy, frozen goods, pastries, sometimes even packaged meats. He stayed away from fresh beef. Too many eyes on that, but everything else moved freely. Some say it happened this way, others say differently. But most of the Old Testimony agrees that during those years the expired stock was not garbage. It was revenue. A supermarket could buy older goods for half the price and still sell them at full cost. A diner could take frozen patties that had sat in storage too long and serve them without customers noticing. The families received a cut. Vince received a cut. The warehouse men received a cut. The product kept moving. The decline began quietly, not with federal raids, not with an informant, just the natural shift of the times. By the early 70s, supermarkets started bringing in their own quality control staff. Corporate buyers replaced neighborhood owners. Audits became more common. Inventory systems improved. A box could not just disappear anymore. A pallet could not be relabeled without someone noticing. Then came the city's fiscal crisis. Budgets shrank. Agencies consolidated. Suddenly, inspectors who never checked anything before began checking everything because they needed to justify their jobs. It was not aimed at the families. It was aimed at the paperwork. But paperwork was the one place this system could not hide forever. The Genovese family also changed leadership. After Vito Genovese died in '71, new men stepped up. And like every new generation, they brought new priorities. Some wanted bigger earners. Some wanted rackets that looked cleaner. Some wanted to step away from anything that smelled like a grocery truck. Food did not excite them. It was steady, but it was not glamorous. And newer guys in the life preferred quicker money. The final blow came when large chains introduced computerized tracking. Small at first, limited, but enough. A delivery that used to be documented by hand now had to match an electronic system. If 10 cases left a warehouse, 10 had to arrive. If dates did not match, someone got a note. The kind of small notes that made warehouse managers nervous and made families rethink who controlled what. By 1974, Vince had already stepped back. Not pushed out, just eased off. Older men do that when they see the world changing faster than the old methods can adapt. He took a smaller role, a small cut, a few side arrangements with diners he had known for years. Nothing major. Nothing worth attention. The younger guys tried to keep the system alive, but they did not understand the patience behind it. They pushed too fast. They mixed product that should not be mixed. They ignored expiration windows Vince had memorized decades earlier. Within 2 years, the system fell apart. Most stores tightened standards. Some distributors were reorganized. Supermarket audits increased. The families moved on to other rackets that demanded less coordination. Vince disappeared into the small circles of retired warehouse men who lived modestly and talked quietly. He died in 1989.
Heart failure.
His obituary mentioned him as a former warehouse supervisor. That was it. No stories, no connections. Just a man who worked in food distribution for most of his life. But the older men remember. The clerks, the drivers, the butchers, the night shift workers who saw him on the docks at 3 in the morning, going through crates without raising his voice. They say he understood the business better than anyone else. They say he kept things steady. They say half the city ate food that passed through his hands without ever knowing it. The stores changed, the city changed. The shelves became cleaner. The systems became tighter. But the memory stayed in the places where the work once happened. In the cold rooms, in the forklifts, in the loading docks before dawn. The truth is simple. For more than a decade, a quiet man with steady hands and a clear mind turned outdated food into money. Not through force, not through fear, just through understanding a system better than the people who built it. And that is how a city fed itself without ever knowing who controlled what it ate.